There's three things that I want to do in today's homily. The first one is just to recount a bit of the history of what we're celebrating today on this feast of or solemnity really, of the Epiphany. And second, and tell a quick tale of two kingdoms that we see present in the gospel. And thirdly, a word of caution, especially culturally, of how we can be in danger of becoming kings or queens of our own kingdom. So first of all, the Epiphany. Why do we celebrate it? If I may briefly, if you'll allow me, to recount the history of the Old Testament in 2 minutes. Ready? I got a few laughs the other time. Genesis 1 and 2, the creation of all the world, of all creation. Genesis 3, Adam and Eve they want to decide for themselves what's good and evil, and they fall from God's friendship. The world is in a mess from Genesis chapter 4 to chapter 11. Chapter 12, God does not want to remain far from his creation, and so he invites to friendship again a man named Abraham, who is considered our father in faith because he goes without knowing details, but trusts again that God will give him the promised land. At the same time, he promises to Abraham, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars. Ironically, at that time, if you read carefully that book of Genesis, that chapter of Genesis, God is showing Abram at the time, stars during the daytime, which means it can't possibly be counted. Then a lot of stuff other happens. Abraham gives birth to Isaac. Isaac gives birth to Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. Jacob's name will eventually be changed to Israel, hence the country Israel. Israel is supposed to be comprised of 12 different tribes. Over time, those 12 tribes are divided. They're conquered with only one, or actually two tribes left. The tribe of Judah, which we hear about today in the gospel, named after Judea or Judah, the same thing. And the tribe of Levi, who didn't have any land, but they were priests. And so the Lord was their inheritance, and therefore they did not have land. They were keepers of the temple. So in this time, there were two groups of people at the time. That was the whole Old Testament history, okay? So there's a lot more details in there and stuff. So there's one tribe left, the tribe of Judah. And that's where Jerusalem is located. The other tribe of Levi is still left too. So at the time, the first century, there were only two groups of people in the world according to those who had received the promise from God through Abraham, which was at that time the remnant, the Jewish people left. That's where we get our word Jews from, is from the tribe of Judah, the last tribe left. Okay, so there's two groups of people left in the world. There are Jews who are still the heirs of the promise, and there are Gentiles who include everyone else. But remember that promise to Abraham when God invites humanity back to his friendship? He has Abram count the stars in the daytime sky, which are beyond number. Remember, when we look at Scripture, we interpret it two ways, literally and spiritually. Abraham had a number of descendants biologically. But spiritually, today, in this story, in the Gospel of Matthew, we find for the first time that through his chosen people, God has opened salvation up to the Gentiles. The Epiphany means the manifestation. In particular, the Epiphany means the manifestation of something divine. We know this because there was a former ruler of the Babylonians named Antiochus IV, and he took the second title of Epiphanes, which means he was basically claiming himself to be divinity revealed, and his decisions were basically God's decisions. So when the wise men, or the wise guys, however you want to say it, the magi, who were considered magicians or people they sought for knowledge or wisdom, had gathered just about as much wisdom probably as they could gather. They were probably comforted, being consulted, but realized at one point that there was a new star that had appeared in the sky. What was the star? I don't know. Some people propose that it was just an angel guiding them on the way. The gospel says a star. But they follow that star to wisdom because everyone was looking at that time for a Messiah. And it's not much different than our own day, is it? How many of us are looking for a Messiah? I think You read in the news, you talk to people, and these people rise up, I'm going to save the world. And people sort of clamor to them. And then they realize, well, it's not going to work out. How many predictions of the end of the world have come in the last 10 years? 5, 6, 7? And people run to that because they're like, all right, we have some definiteness. We good. The world is going to end tomorrow at 5 o'clock. I better get to confession and do everything I need to do. But they were looking for a king. And so when the wise men, the Magi, come to Bethlehem or to Judea, what do they first look for? They look for a king, a newborn king who would be born where? In a castle. Whose castle? Herod's. So when they go to Herod, notice how they go to Herod and they say, we are looking for the newborn king of the Jews. Now, if you know the history of this particular Herod, there were many different Herods, but this particular Herod, the reality is he had killed his son. His son, they believe, was a teenager when he had desired his father's throne. He was so adamant about keeping his own kingdom and fearing that anyone should rule instead of him, that as soon as he suspected his son of wanting to steal his throne, he simply had him killed. So when it says in the gospel, we hear King Herod heard this, we've come to give homage to the newborn king. It says when King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Because King Herod's kingdom was a kingdom like most kingdoms. When they are threatened, people die. When they are threatened, the threat must be eliminated. When the Magi realize that Herod himself discovers that it's Bethlehem where the newborn king is to be born, he wants to know why, because that newborn king is going to interfere with his kingdom. And he wants him eliminated. And so the Magi are sent, bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh, symbols of adoration and death, that Jesus would eventually endure to be anointed in his body, incense fit for somebody divine, and kings always are surrounded by gold. And so the question is, we have two kingdoms here that the wise men no doubt understood the wisdom of worldly rulers. But also, in the same time, I'm sure if they were truly wise, the reality that every one of those kingdoms who claimed divinity, especially Antiochus IV, Caesar, and any number of people who claimed some divine authority, their kingdoms end. And they're looking for a new wisdom. And they find their destination in a manger in Bethlehem. The tale of two kingdoms. One king would kill for his kingdom. Another king would die for his. One king would have subjects. Another king would have sons and daughters. One's kingdom would end, and one's kingdom would be eternal. That's the tale of the two kingdoms. What does it have to do with us? Is, friends, we have to choose what kingdom we belong to. The caution that I wanted to give at the end of this homily is something that I've experienced culturally. The desire of businesses and services of trying to treat every individual person as a king or a queen. Rulers of their own imaginary kingdoms. The demands that their base desires must be fulfilled in an instant. Demands that fantasies must be condoned by reality. Even seeking government authorities to ensconce laws in order to endorse immoral behavior. The danger and the caution is always that we can become kings and queens of our own imaginary kingdoms. And I know the reality of this because when I was Christmas shopping, I can go on my smartphone and I can sit in my recliner and I can order everything that I need for Christmas and have it brought 10 feet away from me, paid for, bought, and even wrapped if I want, and it will be done for me. The danger of our culture of making us individual kings and queens and making decisions arbitrarily based on what we like and what we don't like. Herod was notorious, just as every other dictator has been notorious through history, as being paranoid, anxious, fearful, treating obstacles in their life as obstacles and interference rather than opportunities for going in grace, patience, and virtue. This is manifested in our culture in popular sayings. How many of us, and I heard in high school many times in athletics, mind over matter? Michael, mind over matter. Mind over matter. If I can imagine that I'm a bird, would it be a good idea to jump off a roof? I don't know anyone who would really love me and say, hey, Father, you shouldn't do that. You're going to get hurt. And if you did and I got hurt, I would probably blame you for not warning me. Things that come through our culture and innocent, seemingly innocent cartoons. And I'm not picking on Polar Express here, but I'm just pointing out the dangers of the very subtle ways that our culture turns our minds into thinking that we need to be kings and queens of our own kingdom. In the Polar Express I was watching with my nieces and nephews, there's a line in there in particular. If anyone's seen the Polar Express, it's just a movie about a train and they're going with this conductor and everything. Most people have seen it. But there's sort of this pinnacle at the end where the conductor, who's played the voice of Tom Hanks, it's a cartoon, he's telling the people as they're getting on the train or trying to give them, impart some wisdom, he says, it doesn't matter where the train is going. What matters is that you're on board. Well, I don't know about you, but if you've ever boarded a train, a plane, or an automobile, it's precisely the destination that makes you get into the plane, train, or automobile. And we hear that and we say, yeah, we got to get on board. We got to get on board with progress, science. Oh, yeah, we got to get on board with that. We got to do it. Yeah, that's what we got to do it. If we're going to be happy, we got to do it. And it's a lie. I'm not picking on Polar Express, remember. You can come in and you can say that. But my niece, for example, she's in college. What's all the rage right now? What are your kids experiencing in college? She's asked the question, what are your pronouns? Are you male, female? What are you? She said, I'm obviously a female. Mind over matter? In the beginning, God created them male and female. I'll choose what I want to be, God. I'll decide what's right and what's wrong. I'm the king, I'm the queen. Dangerous philosophy, friends. Dangerous philosophy. Broad-mindedness, this is a quote from Bishop Sheen, broad-mindedness when it comes to indifference between good and evil will eventually lead to the hatred of the good. A hatred of the good. Who is the good? The good is God. What is his manifestation? A child in Bethlehem and a king who would die for his people rather than subject them like a regular king would. Friends, we have a choice of what kingdom we want to belong to. That's the point of this. Don't buy into the dangerous philosophy that somehow obstacles in life are not opportunities that God gives us for exercising virtue. Be careful about people who would put you on a throne, whether it be servers, vendors, businesses, whatever it is. All of those things are okay, but what I'm saying is be cautious. When I'm not in the parish, when I have a day off, I run to the woods. I get away from my cell phone. Because even as I think it may be serving me, I realize that the reality is I'm the tool who's being used by it. Oftentimes to serve an economy that's not about serving people, but about serving something else. Are we consumers, as the question goes, or are we being consumed? So today, as we hear this story of the Magi, they had to be uncomfortable. They had to appeal to a court of the stars in the sky, of something outside of themselves, to see a wisdom that went beyond conventional wisdom. That God had invited them to a kingdom and the Gentiles in the world that is out of this world. Don't make your kingdom here.